Hello and welcome to this morning's webinar. Today we're looking at evolving models of digital distribution for performance. I'm Linda Coburn, I'm the moderator today, and I'm going to be setting the scene before we go over to our case studies. So the webinar, as all of this series, is brought to you by The Space. And at Essence, we are a commissioning and skills development agency, so working with a whole host of arts organisations to support their work in the digital sphere, as you can see from the slide. And we've got four fantastic speakers today. We're being joined by Sarah Fortescue, who's the head of distribution for The Space. So she works with all kinds of different organisations and will give us a flavour of the work she does advising and guiding arts organisations on how to successfully reach audiences. And then we've got three really interesting case studies. We'll be hearing, and I'm going to get our speakers to give you a bit of a wave. We'll be hearing from Jess Brough, who is the founder of Fringe of Colour, which is an arts organisation that runs a film festival, digital film festival, did last year and will do again. And she's really speaking about that. And she'll be followed by Nick Sweeting, who's the producer for the Javad Alipur company, talking about the different ways that they have found new audiences for their work, the theatrical performance work. And then our third speaker is Jack Fayter, who is the head of he's the digital content and platforms manager for Bristol Old Vic, and he's going to be talking about the evolution of Bristol Old Vic at Home, which they started last year and has now gone through sort of it's in its third evolution, so a process of looking at distribution in many different ways. So that's the sort of core of this morning. We've got a short break in the middle, so you get a bit of a chance to revive and keep your energy up. And we also, a couple of other things just to say to you about how we work. We use the chat function all the way through the webinar. So hopefully that's really helpful. You know, there's lots of people on this call and you might have ideas or advice for one another. You might have questions that you think people in the audience can answer. All of that goes in there. And when we get to the point where you can ask questions directly to our speakers, add those questions into chat and I'll put the questions to the speaker. If you've got a question specifically for a speaker, please write to Jess or Nick or Jack so that we know to pick those out. We had almost 100 questions in advance, and obviously we won't be able to cover everything. So there's a few things I'd like to point out that we won't be covering today because we've got other resources that might be helpful to you. So some questions about live streaming, and in the chat we'll put a link to a previous webinar that covers live streaming and some of the practicalities of that could be useful to you. Rights is another issue that we just don't have time to go into today. So again, we'll put a link into our toolkit. And we're also not really covering the kind of creative decisions today. That's and how you decide how you want to capture a performance creatively. But luckily we do have another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks' time. Again, we'll put the link into that where we're looking at different modes of capturing your work. So that's really my setup. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Sarah Fortescue, who's as I said, our head of distribution. And I've got some questions for Sarah to really sort of frame this session before we go into our case studies. So Sarah, really nice to have you with us. And the first question, really thinking about the work that you've been doing with different arts organisations, what trends have you seen in digital distribution over the last few months?
So in general, the biggest shift, which won't really come as any surprise, is the interest in monetization, whether that's through a membership scheme or pay-per-view or just being slightly smarter with the fundraising asks. More and more organizations and artists are looking at how to distribute natively, so from their own websites. And that is typically to retain control over the audience data and terms, so how long it's up there for, and also how much they can charge. So the other thing is it's now really rare that people aren't creating and distributing something for free online. And from the people I've spoken to, which is quite a lot over the last few months, is they seem to be a lot more aware of how to do this effectively, kind of reach bigger audiences, which is really good news. But just going back to the point about the asking for money, if that's something that you want to do, there is a new report by Indigo, and I'm going to drop 2 reports in the chat in a minute. There's some really interesting findings, initial research in there about price plans, what people are happy to pay, how they'd like to pay it. And one of the things that's listed in there is that at the moment, people seem to be more interested in the one-off offers, pay-per-view, rather than subscription or memberships. So only 15% of quite a big sample size said that a monthly subscription would be their preferred way of viewing things. So I thought that was quite interesting, and I know a lot of people have asked. So it's really in-depth report, and I'm going to share it in a second. But the other thing to say is that people are not watching one thing. Luckily, they are coming back for more and more content, which is why I would stress the importance of the quality of the work, both for your own organization, but for the sector as a whole, because this is such a shift now towards the digital that we want to give people the best experience, so that they do come back.
Thanks, Sarah. Before I ask you the next question, I remembered that I should have explained at the beginning that not only do we have a live captioner, so if captions would be helpful to you, go to the bottom and you can use the captions, but also to say that we'll be recording the session. So if you need that recorded version afterwards, please send us an email. Sorry, Sarah, I'll go back to you. So following on then, what guidance or recommendations, you're already sort of starting to hint at it, do you give the organisations that you work with?
Yeah, so for the free to access work or content with the fundraising on, or without fundraising, it's really the same as it ever was, which I've spoken about for years, which is the importance of partnerships, both with peer organisations, or just other platforms that might celebrate your work, and thinking a little bit outside the box of who to approach. And the same would be for pay-per-view. We're seeing a lot of organizations, touring companies working together to help share the tickets, which is brilliant. Other than that, the guidance for each artist or organization is completely unique. I'm just going to run through some questions that I would usually ask someone before they made any choices about what distribution model to choose. So what is your audience reach like? Do you have or do you need a lot of data? Does it need to be a live stream, or can it be as live? Do you have a really short window that you need to distribute in, or can you enter negotiations with other platforms for showing it for a longer time? Is it something you're looking to do as a one-off, as a temporary measure, as a response to the pandemic? Or is this a long-term strategy for when the doors to your buildings are open again? Can you afford the initial investment in a platform that might be able to do everything, or do you need a low-risk approach to start with? And lastly, can you clear the rights for monetizing it, because it is just slightly different to putting it out for free. So when you've answered those questions, you should have a clearer idea of what options are most suitable. And by the end of the webinar, the details of some of those different approaches should be a bit clearer, but do drop any specifics in the chat and I'll try and answer them.
Will you put those questions into chat as well, so that they're available during the morning? That would be really helpful.
I'll do it just after this, along with those 2 reports that I mentioned.
And again, I know, sort of referring to the questions we were asked in advance, and we got lots of variations on a theme, which boiled down to which distribution platform works best for which audience. And I don't think we're in a position to answer that in granular detail today, but what kind of advice would you give people to help them to find answers to that question?
Yeah, so some attempts have been made to find that out, and I don't know whether it's reassuring or not, but the outcome of those attempts is that it's really not possible to draw clear-cut conclusions. There are some kind of quite common sense rules that I will share, which is that if it's short form, you are best off having it as shareable content on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and audiences are looking at content for a lot longer on a TV. So even if that's via the YouTube app, with the shortest durations being those on a phone. So if a paywall is something that you are looking to consider, then maybe ask, is that something that can still be viewed on a TV set? And can you encourage your audiences to kind of head that way rather than watching it on a smaller screen? If you're looking to do longer form content for free, you don't need to restrict it to one platform, which is what we often see, but maybe just ensure that you're including YouTube or Vimeo in the mix to encourage the kind of bigger screen experience. And then more specifically, the best way to find this out for yourself is just to dig into the audience data in your own channels and seeing what the audience behaviors currently are and building on from there, and looking at peer organizations and seeing what their approaches are, because it's usually for quite a good reason. What I wouldn't do is assume, for example, that older people aren't going to watch it because it's on YouTube, or make these assumptions about your audience that may not be true. We had a company recently host their show. It was a full-length show, but they hosted it on a third-party YouTube page, YouTube channel, and that YouTube channel was aimed at families, but the work itself was for kind of older generation, and the biggest audience for the show were those in the 65 plus category, which is the same for their live work. So even though it was a family channel, the same audiences were coming through. So in general, the advice would be emulate what happens in the live world with your work, and that it is more about the content choices than the platform itself.
Okay.
Hopefully that's helpful.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sarah. So you'll be around, won't you, and in the chat through the whole of the webinar. So if anybody's got sort of specific questions to you, they can ask them in using the chat function. Is that all right?
Yeah, super.
Smashing. Thank you very much, Sarah. So we're going to bring you to so we've got 3 specific case studies today. And the first one, as I said, is with Jess Brough, who's just looking at fringe of colour. So I'm just going to check that Jess is available to us. Jess, are you there?
Hi, I'm here.
Hello, hello.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you okay. So just to start us off, can you give us a sense of Fringe of Colour and what, as an organisation, you're all about?
Yeah, so there's two things. There's Fringe of Colour and there's Fringe of Colour Films. So Fringe of Colour started in 2018 as a sort of response to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and the difficulty it could be for finding performances throughout the month at the festival by Black artists and artists of colour, who make up quite a significantly smaller proportion of the performances at the festival than shows by white artists. And what I wanted to do was just make those performances a bit more easier to find, shine a spotlight on those people. And I created a spreadsheet just on Google Sheets, a database of those shows. And the next year that developed into a free ticket scheme where we were collaborating with the Fringe to provide free tickets to Black audiences and audiences of colour to go to those shows from the spreadsheet. So connecting the audience and the artist. And then the following year, obviously, we had a pandemic hit us. So the festival was cancelled, as were many other festivals across Scotland. All the theatres across the country and around the world were closed down, and our free ticket scheme was no longer required because you don't need free tickets for shows that don't exist. So we had to think, is this a time for us to, is this a time specifically for me as well to sit back and sort of rest up a little bit and just sort of focus on what we can do when these places reopen? or are we seeing a sort of similar trend in this new digital landscape that's coming out from big theatres commissioning work by, again, the more well-known or the more successful white artists out there, the Shakespeares, the plays that we kind of already know about, rather than commissioning new work by people who would have been on the Fringe of Colour spreadsheet? And the answer was no. We're seeing this sort of same gap reappear in these digital spaces. So we wanted to try and help with that. We decided to create our own platform and commission our own work and work with the artists that we'd maybe started to build a relationship with through meeting them in Edinburgh or through knowing about their work from social media. And the focus on those commissions was really this idea of helping artists who will have lost their opportunities to perform and their platforms transition into the digital space and understand how they could translate their stage performances into a sort of filmed version of their play or their dance or whatever else they were previously doing before the lockdown. So that is how Fringe of Colour Films was born, and we started telling people about it, that was happening and these films were going to go out, and other people just started spontaneously messaging me and asking if they could submit their work and their films to the festival, if they could be included. And they weren't asking for money to be a part of the festival, they weren't asking for anything other than to have people view their films and their performances alongside these other shows. And I didn't really have a good enough reason to say no, so we ended up just accepting about 30, 40 submissions to the festival. And we ended up with a Fringe of Colour Films that ran from the 1st of August to the 31st with 51 films across the month. And that was, yeah, that's basically how the festival was born.
Brilliant. So, we're going to watch the trailer now, and just to give people a sense of what it is that you're setting out to achieve, really, and what the film festival is all about. So, Sam, are you ready to play the trailer in? It's about a minute long.
Okay, I can't clap anymore.
Thanks, thank you. So what we're really interested in is the idea of film festival as a distribution platform for work. So looking back at last year, how did it work? What happened? What were your successes, really?
So what we ended up doing was we had a weekly release sort of model for the festival. So I think we took what we had learned from online content at that point during lockdown, and we thought, you know, individually, me and Hannah McGurk, who was working with me at the time, we thought, what did we like about some of these online platforms and what were we actually struggling to engage with? And for me personally, I found it really difficult to remember that an event was coming up or a screening was coming up, because it's very different to having it in your calendar and knowing, you know, you're doing every kind of thought process, thinking about what you're going to wear, when you'll have dinner before you leave, all of these things that make going to an event very concrete in your mind, so you don't end up forgetting about it. But when something is online and all you have to do is click a link, it can be so easy to miss it. You've got a 1 hour opportunity maybe, or a few hours opportunity to catch that show. Or perhaps you've run out of time and you didn't get a ticket in time. So we wanted to, I guess, start with the idea that everything should be as relaxed as possible. We wanted people to have as much time as we could give them to know that the content was coming up, and find time to watch it and engage with it, talk about it, return to it if they wanted to. And so across the 4 weeks, we released films in chunks of, I think, about 12 a week. And so those films came up on midnight Saturday morning. And they were up for 7 days, and then they came off, and then we put another collection of films up. And that helped us for a few reasons. It allowed all of those artists to have their time to shine and their time in the sun, and for us to be able to shout about them on social media. But it also allowed us to create a sort of sense of urgency, so that people knew Friday was coming around, that's going to be the last day. They would have to watch some of these films. Oh, you better go and sign back into your account and watch 6 films. So we could see a big uptake in subscribers or viewers sort of every Friday night, which worked back then because you couldn't really do anything else on Friday night. So
yeah. And how did people, so the audience for it, how did they pay for the films? What was your model?
Mm-hmm. So we had a subscription-based model where people would donate the cost of what we had calculated to be sort of the standard ticket for a show at the Edinburgh Fringe. So it's around £12, but we made it £10. So you would buy a pass that covered the whole festival. So £10 was the standard donation for a standard pass, £5 for concessions, and that we kind of allowed people to decide if they were or were not concession. Anybody who was unemployed or didn't have the funds to cover a £10 ticket, or as a student, or anything that's usually listed under that, but that's up to the individual to decide. And then we had an extra option of £50 for organisations, say a theatre organisation or a paper, who wanted to buy a ticket under the organisation email and share that email and password with the people who worked for the organisation, that kind of thing, to encourage other organisations to get involved and to see the content, but also to contribute to a project that was not funded by the arts councils in any way at that point. And that allowed us to cover costs for the team, screening fees for all those people who did submit a film to the festival, and crucially to also cover the cost of our commissioned films as well. So we only started with about, I think, £6,000 from a fundraiser that we'd done in February, and we ended up having to raise a substantial amount more to do the festival, but it ended up being possible because of the pricing scheme, but also because of a lot of, as you mentioned, Sarah, a lot of partners and organisations who wanted to support the festival and knew Fringe of Colour from before, chipping in for more than the cost of a ticket.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if you've got any specific questions to the audience. If you've got any specific questions for Jess now, you can add those in, and I'll put them to. So, Jess, we've got a follow-up question from some asking, how much did you pay for the screening fees and how did you work that out?
Right, I'm just exactly looking that up now so I don't get it wrong.
Okay.
We had the payment structure for screening fees depended on the length of the film. So we had films that were a minute long, and we had films that were 40 minutes long. So we decided to sort of stratify that, according to the length of the film. So films that were under 2 minutes, we paid a screening fee of £20. Between 2 and 5 minutes, it was £50, £100 for films that were between 5 and 15 minutes, and then anything that was over 15 minutes long, we paid a screening fee of £150. And that's the same payment structure that we're using for submissions this year as well for the festival in August.
Thank you. And what about when we spoke, you talked about the audience and how this made it, your work suddenly available to a much wider audience, and who were the audience for who came, and how do you talk about them?
It's a great question. I mean, one of the extra things that we offered for access to the festival were and crucially, because the festival is for work by Black artists and artists of colour specifically, we're also looking at those people as our audiences as well, wanting to connect in the same way that we did with our ticket scheme, wanting to connect audiences with artists who can maybe see their story portrayed or can understand something about the work on a really deep and meaningful level. So for that reason, we wanted to make sure that the festival was as accessible as possible to the audiences that it really was created for. So people who needed a free ticket to the festival, who were Black or were a person of colour, could email us directly and get free access that way. And we gave out, I think, over 100 free passes, which means over 100 people of colour at least came to the festival. But I think across everybody, we had, you know, in a total about 700 subscribers. A lot of those people were folks that we connected through the big fundraiser in February. A lot of people were those who we'd connected with through the free ticket scheme. So people of colour of sort of any age, but there was quite a young range as well. And yeah, other arts organisations came to the festival. We had a really nice trend of audiences from outside Scotland, because Fringe of Colour is Edinburgh based. And a lot of the work that we commissioned was by artists who were Scotland based or had a connection to Scotland. But we also had a lot of work from around the world, from lots of different countries and continents. And it was interesting because we ended up seeing that we had audiences from about 37 countries, I think, because we didn't geo-block any of our content, and all you really needed was an email address and a valid bank card to access a ticket. So a lot of the people who were from outside the UK who were watching the content were sometimes from countries where one of the artists with a film at the festival was from that country, for example, Germany and Kenya. But then there were some other countries that really just came out of nowhere, and I was so thrilled to see that Fringe of Colour films had reached Fiji, for example. Who knew that would happen? And I think that can be such a great tool for online arts festivals and online film festivals, because there's no reason to sort of limit ourselves to the country that we're in. A lot of these conversations are fascinating around the world, and if you have no reason to sort of geo-block, then it can be a really wonderful sort of experience.
Thank you. Somebody's asking about whether you used your website as the platform. How do people reach you?
Yeah, so we were actually in the process of building a website back in February. So before everything sort of kicked off, January, February, we decided that we wanted to make a website that would help facilitate with our free ticket scheme, so it would be less of a manual process as it was last year. Bless the team at the Fringe Society who helped us with that, but we wanted to make it a bit easier. So we started working with website developers, Scotty, who were Edinburgh based at the time, to put a website together. And then obviously when we realized there would be no free tickets, we ended up transforming the idea for that website into a streaming site. So sort of from about March onwards, we made that move towards thinking, how do we display the films and the thumbnails? How are people going to get access to the work? Are we going to have a paywall? That kind of thing. So now, you know, fringeofcolour.co.uk is mainly for the online arts festival. I'm not sure how we're going to use it when things sort of go back to being live and in person, and if we end up doing the database and the free ticket scheme again. But for now, it is mainly for the streaming site.
Yeah, it's really amazing listening to you sort of talking about all of this without a huge infrastructure behind you. You know, you've really just taken it on and started it. It's fantastic. It's really exciting to hear. What are your plans for next year? Where are you going with it? And then I'm going to come back to a couple of questions from the audience, and then we'll go. What do you think will happen next?
So really excitingly, we announced on Monday that we are going to be doing the festival all over again this August. So Fringe of Colour Films 2021 will be running from the 1st to the 15th inclusive of August. And that's less time than we ran last year. It's only 2 weeks rather than 4, because what we're hoping to do this year is focus on sort of more to do with development of the artists who are taking part in the festival. We were looking at all kinds of things from last year, like the physical strain of running a month-long festival, for example, it was a lot of work, and it was a difficult period to be doing something like that in anyway. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't overdoing it again or pushing ourselves too far. So we thought 2 weeks manageable, but we also wanted to think about how we could use the money that we're hoping to raise more concretely for the people who are involved. So we needed more people on the team to do very specific roles like curation and programming. We have someone on the team, Sky, whose role is she's assistant programmer, but she's also our healing consultant. So we'll be working with the artists who are submitting work to the festival, working with our commissioned artists to check in on how they are actually doing, with their mental health while they're going through that process of creating work during a pandemic and being a part of the festival. We didn't really have support for ourselves last year, and it was difficult, and I think we learned from that. And so it's important that we have somebody like Sky on the team whose main role is really for that support. Because we have limited, well, we don't even have the money yet, but we will end up having limited money. We wanted to use that for as many purposeful roles as possible, rather than using it on having a very, very long arts festival. So we're cutting down the length of the festival to put it into the team and to put it into the participants. We've got some really exciting programs coming up for the people who are commissioning and the people who are submitting work. If they get accepted, they'll be able to have access to Fringe of Colour Films, Fringe of Colour Saturday School, which will be a series of workshops that will allow them to explore anything from sort of pitching and pitching to articles. We have a writing platform, so for our writers to learn more about pitching, to our filmmakers learning more about translating performance into film, and all kinds of workshops around being in sort of a digital arts festival. And yeah, so we're scaling it down, but we're also doing sort of 5 times more the work, but we have a bigger team to do it.
And just so there's some quite specific questions in chat, which I'm going to ask you, if you wouldn't mind afterwards, if you would have a look and see if you can answer any of those writing. But the last sort of question to you out loud is, what about, would you have any tips or guidance for artists or arts organisations who want to apply to film festivals? What do you think would be useful for them?
This is actually one of the workshops that we're going to be running as part of our Saturday school. And to be honest, my advice is probably quite weak. I will be attending that workshop. I think a lot of artists who work with us are the people who have not felt like their films would be received well at more traditional film festivals, maybe don't see their work in conversation with the work at those festivals, or they're not sure how to do that process, or they're not sure if it's going to be taken seriously because maybe it's a bit more experimental, that kind of thing. I think also it can be expensive. I think for a few festivals you have to pay to apply, or you have to register, and we're trying to sort of avoid any of those barriers. Advice for people who are applying: I think really it's important to look at the festival and see what the kind of work is that they are programming, and what is the kind of conversation that they're having. Do you feel like you want to be a part of that conversation? Do you feel like your work will be in some really exciting conversations with the other work that is likely to be screened at that festival? If not, you got to think about why that might be, and also think about how much time and energy you have to spend putting into a festival. You have to make sure that you're promoting the work when it comes out. You have to make sure that they're not describing it inaccurately, or they're not treating it inaccurately. It's not just as simple as submitting your film, letting it be shown to the world. There's a lot of individual work required. So I think making sure that the arts festival is the right place for your work and will respect it and will treat it well is an important place to start.
Fab. Thank you so much, Jess. That's great. Really, really interesting and inspiring to hear. Fab. So if you wouldn't mind just having a look at those questions.
Yeah, I'll take a look now.
Brilliant. Thank you. And then and we'll move on to our second case study. So this is going to be brought to you by Nick Sweeting, who is the producer with the Javad Alipur company. Nick, are you there?
Hi, Linda. Yes, I am. Yeah. Hi.
Hello. Really nice to see you, Nick. And so, as we did with Jess, we'll just start by, can you give us a really potted introduction to the company and the work that you make, and then we'll show a clip after that.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And thanks, Jess. She and Fringe Colour were a great support to us when we did our show, premiered our show, Rich Kids, A History of Shopping Malls in Tehran in Edinburgh in 2019. We're a really young company. Javad has only made 2 shows as an individual artist. Rich Kids being the second, the first being a show called The Believers Are But Brothers, and which actually, before I joined the company, Javad worked with The Space and BBC4 to make that into a TV show as well as a live show. So we were coming into this time last year with Rich Kids having opened in Edinburgh and then about to play at Battersea. As a really young company, being really excited as the show had won a Fringe first and was on a bit of a high. Then everything got shut down. So we thought, what do we do now? And supported by the Arts Council and Battersea Arts Centre and Norfolk and Norwich Festival, we decided rather randomly to make a piece of online theatre, which I knew nothing about. I'm very, very old school live theatre person, but the team made a fantastic piece of our online art theatre. Javad, our director, co-creator Kirsty Housley, along with the rest of the team, and we platformed it in what we thought would be one of very few performances through BAC at the end of May last year. Simultaneously, we got asked through a different strand of our work, but basically following on from some stuff in Believers, we got asked to do a film online festival called Electric Dreams in London, or being platformed out of London in July. So we sort of had these 2 routes for this new piece of online work, one a sort of theatre strand and one an independent film festival strand. And we got 2 lucky breaks in the fact that the Under the Radar Theatre Festival in New York, who we'd been talking to for a while since Edinburgh 2019 about taking the live show there in January of this year, went online and kept us as part of their programme. So we did a 3-week platformed run there in January, and simultaneously out of Electric Dreams, sort of rather wonderfully, the Sundance Film Festival picked the show up for 3 performances at the end of January, beginning of February. So we've been on this slight odyssey and really weird journey, new for us, of platforming the work through these 2 very different sort of areas, one independent theatres and theatre festivals, and one independent film festivals. And I think part of the appeal, if people haven't heard of the show and of Javad's work, both Believers and Rich Kids require 2 types of viewing. One, if you're in a theatre, the live thing that's going on in front of you, and also what's going on your mobile phone. And that translated for the online piece into what's going on your main screen, but simultaneously also what's going on your phone. And Rich Kids, we used YouTube to platform the main screen experience, which is what you would have been seeing in the stage equivalent, but we also use Instagram to ask people to sign up to a simultaneous Instagram group, both pictorially and as Instagram Live. That's a very short what we're about.
So we thought we'd play a clip to give people a feel. I mean, because it's quite a complicated work, it's not like a trailer, it's just to give you a sort of drop you into a moment of it. So we've got a minute to play. So it's pretty loud, isn't it? So we'll let everybody know that, and then Sam's going to play it out.
Part 3. Scroll down. 1 year before the crash. When the plane touches down in Dubai, Parivash squeezes Hussein's hand. This is her first time outside of Iran. She hasn't slept at all.
Hussein wakes up slowly. He knocks the drinks holder with his knee. He's used to coming first class, but he didn't tell his parents this time, just snuck the tickets onto the credit card and came over.
Scroll down. The hotel room is huge. Parivash takes a photo of the city skyline, making sure her manicured hand is just in shot. This is it, she thinks. She video calls her sister. She asks if her parents have gone to bed. Daria says they have. She shows Daria the room. Daria can't believe that she's not using a filter. Parivash asks if the lie she told her parents is holding up. Daria says it is. Parivash makes her promise to tell her if they begin to suspect anything. She hangs up and walks downstairs. The valet walks her to the hire car, and the automatic door of a yellow Ferrari pops open. She steps in and offers Hussein a swig of champagne.
Linda, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So that's just a feel for the work and how it is. And so when we talk, there's really you've got, as you say, you've got two models of distribution, and we've got maybe 10 minutes, so sort of 5 minutes to speak about both. Kind of, firstly, we're going to go first to your sort of thinking about the film festivals. What's been your experience of using those under the radar, and also the other film festivals that you've been involved in? So let's just start with that.
So Under the Radar is a theatre festival. The sort of equivalent, and it was joyous that we got asked to be part of Sundance this year, which I'd only ever dreamed about as a theatre producer. The main thing that we found through independent film festivals is that monetarily for us they're a no-go. Because the version of the show that we have stuck with is streaming it as live, which requires us to do a timed start and needs people technically at the back end of the show, the production manager and the person running Instagram, to be present. So we have costs, and Sundance covered those, but nothing extra. And we've had a lot of take up or a lot of interest post Sundance, as we expected, but no monetary combination coming out of that. A lot of, as Jess mentioned, a lot of these independent theatre festivals either want you to pay to be in them, or you get a free pass, as it were, to be part of it, but they're certainly not going to pay you any money. So we've made a decision, because of Javad's interest in sort of screenwriting and development, that we will invest a small amount of money in being ongoing parts of those festivals. But they're very much for, more of a profile and a connect a sort of connective strand rather than any monetization.
And is it effective as a kind of networking and getting your work out there? Has it had an impact?
It has had an impact, yeah. We've started to open up conversations with people in the film world that we wouldn't have dreamt of before. So that's been a very positive thing.
Yeah. And anything else that's come out of it?
No, it's sort of an ongoing, so, it's sort of not quite daily, but sort of 3 or 4 times a week, I am getting emails from, the next person who's heard about it, wherever that might be, which is great. It's an ongoing sort of journey, really.
Yeah. And then the other thing that we spoke about was the international sort of touring model that you've developed, working with the universities and art centres in the US. And do you want to tell us a bit about that as well? Because that's another whole kind of approach to distribution.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting looking at Sarah's questions from her provocation. I'm trying to scroll back and find them, but it was, as a very young company, it's what audience reach like? It's non-existent. Do you have much data? At the time, no, we had no data. Do we have a short window? No, actually, we've got the whole future of the company. And it's not a one-off, it's ongoing. So I've sort of approached it, or we've approached it, in more of a model of how do you book a theatre tour? And, in the old-fashioned way, how do you get it seen, you get as many people to see that as possible, and you get a knock-on effect. Our big break with that was Under the Radar Festival in New York, who worked not just with their usual audience, but actually used it as an opportunity that for once, they got a global audience, and they worked with 15 partner organizations around the world to platform through theatres in Australia, South America, Africa. So our reach for the digital version was far, far more than it could ever have been for the live version if we'd taken it off. And basically, I've just sort of stepped into the role of old-fashioned tour booker, and being able to get just sit here and see who saw it in New York and therefore who's interested. So we're just about to launch into a simultaneous 3-week run in Washington and 2-week run in Seattle in April, which will happen on top of each other. So through the sort of night of most weekends in April, we'll have 3 or 4 performances per night. And then that's onward to Brazil, Canada, Australia, Germany. So yeah, the digital possibilities have been opened up worldwide for us, which using the very old-fashioned theatre tour booking techniques has enabled a much bigger audience for us.
That's really interesting. I'm wondering if any of the audience have got specific questions for you. I'll just invite those now, and then we'll kind of keep going. What do you think has helped you to make a success of this, and work so hard with your international partners and finding an audience?
I mean, I think it's the interest from theatre partners at the moment, sort of both in North America and worldwide, to be able to use the moment in time to connect with us where they might not be able to envisage or plan to have us live as a show. So, for instance, platforming the show in Seattle, Portland, Quebec, Washington, we've been able to secure a really, really good income stream. But for them, the costs are far lower than having to, and the hassle, there's no visas, there's no international travel, there's no international freight. They're not having to pay for a team of 6 to go across, etc., etc. And for the partners that have managed to, secure a decent audience base and a subscription base and monetize their offer, we're working with them to provide a product really that their audiences are interested in without all the additional stuff that comes with international touring.
We've been asked a couple of questions that I will put to you. One is, do you think that this will transfer into interest in live shows in the future?
I think So we've got two sort of aims coming out of this. One where that is less realizable, and we're sort of acknowledging that, but how can we continue to work with those partners on a digital level? And very much so. I mean, we're working on the boards in Seattle at the moment to do a 2 weeks worth of stream in April, and are already talking to them about a Javad residency at the end of next year. So the whole thing, some will come off, some won't, but already there is interest in and a real desire from us that we don't fully become a digital company, that in-person touring combined with the digital stuff is very important to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it reflects the work itself, doesn't it? There's quite a connection between how you put your work out and what you actually make.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent, I don't know whether this, our next piece of work, which is a co-production which involves Sydney Festival and the National Theatre of Parramatta in Sydney. We are planning to do a digital first version of that. So it will happen digitally before it will happen live.
Yeah, great. Just back to the next question. So somebody's asking, so you use the festival to market the shows to venues, then the digital tour brings in ticket income.
Exactly. That's how it's worked. And to address Kate's sort of the roll on from that is that I've sort of gone old school and gone, we've got a product that people really want, and so therefore they have to guarantee money. I'm not doing it on splits in any way, partly because I have no, we're a very small company, and our time and our resource to analyze their ability to bring in income is very limited. So we've just put it out on a guarantee basis, and on top of that, our only risk is a creative royalty that gets split between the creative team for their rights.
Yeah, and there's another follow-on question to that, asking about, so what level of guarantee are you asking for?
There you go, Joe. It's not. It's a proportion of. I spent a bit of time in the autumn. We did a short tour with some UK venues, and it was sort of working out, at what point, what was a reasonable fee, and looking at different venues, whether it's a small art centre or a big sort of repertory theatre, or what the size of the partner. So it's a variable fee, but with some baselines in there around what our costs are as well.
Yeah. And another question that we were asked in advance was about, what would your tips be on sort of building international partnerships? What would you recommend to others who are thinking about working in this way?
I am old school, and I do believe that it's about building the trust and the partnerships. It's first and foremost whether people engage with the work, and we've had bumps in this journey where we've really targeted partners, and actually their artistic director has turned around and gone, this isn't for us. So it's an honesty about that, and it's about communication, clarity, and for me, having a really good production team at the back end, so that actually, part of the reason Woolly Mammoth are doing it in Washington is that the producing team from Under the Radar and the public in New York turned around and went, their production manager is superb. We didn't have a single glitch. So it's about international touring. It's about how good the show is, but has always also been about how confident those teams are that you've probably never met in the case of digital work. How reliant are they? Can they deliver that work at, in our case, most of our screenings are at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, US time, and will they be able to deliver it without any glitches and provide the right backup?
Yeah, lovely. Okay, thank you. And there's a question about rights, which I'm not going to ask you because I think rights questions get quite long, but you might want to have a look at it and see whether you can answer it in the chat afterwards. And And then there's the other questions about, were you always using partners, or have you ever tried your own platform box office?
We haven't, partly because we are such a young company, and you know, before this journey began, we didn't even have our own website this time last year. So we really are reliant on partnerships and partnership agreements, which allow some of the data to come back to us and allow us to build into a place where hopefully, you know, the next show, which is going to be digital first, which will be platformed partly by ourselves as well as our partners. Brilliant.
I think we'll draw to a close there. Thank you so much, Nick. It's been great hearing from you and from Jess really about the sort of new companies and organisations and ways of working emerging. It's tremendous.
Thank you.
Thank you. So please do stay around, and we'll come back to you right at the end. We're going to take it'll be a 4-minute break just to give everybody a chance to breathe a bit. So we'll reconvene at 12 and start again with our third case study. Thank you. Okay, so very quick break. We've still got a third really interesting case study to hear. So I'm going to bring Nick Sweeting in, and sorry, not Nick Sweeting. I'm bringing Jack Fayter, not bringing Nick back. It's Jack Fayter from Bristol Old Vic, who's our next speaker. Jack, are you there?
Hello.
Hello, hello. Nice to see you. So as with the other two, we're specifically speaking about Bristol Old Vic at Home and the work that you've been doing to really engage audiences and reach your audiences in the last year. Can you give us a quick introduction to Bristol Old Vic at Home and the work that you've done up till now? Just set the scene for us, and then we'll watch a film that you made.
Yeah, so Bristol Old Vic at Home was, it sort of started out as a knee-jerk response to when we had to close our doors. And we were like, how are we going to continue bringing what we normally bring to our audience and potentially to bigger audiences in this very strange and uncertain time? And so we dug around in our archive and we had to think about how we can use our engagement department and all that sort of stuff. And we sort of built this digital service, which essentially has become a kind of digital facsimile for our theatre and everything we do, but started out as a way that we could keep engaging with our audience through our engagement department and entertaining our audience with our work. So yeah, and the journey has been from that initial experiment of how we can keep engaging all the way through to now, where it's a kind of whole extra arm of our business. So that's it in very short summary.
In a nutshell. So what we're going to watch is just a 1 minute short film that you put out. You spoke about it almost as series one, the first iteration of Bristol Old Vic at Home. And this is what you put out as a thank you to the people who had watched the content and engaged with it. So it's just a minute. Let's play it, Sam, now. Great. So obviously that was pretty successful, that first tranche. And you was that content on YouTube and on your own channels?
Yeah, so basically we worked in several phases, and phase one was basically our shows were put out on YouTube. There was essentially a big trend of larger arts organizations putting like big shows out for free, and I think there was a slight kind of blitz spirit, public service, let's keep the nation entertained sort of vibe going on, and I think that there was a lot of people tapping into that, and I think that wasn't the kind of primary reason we did it, but I think we felt we had a responsibility to keep stuff going out to our audience, and the best platform that we felt that we could go out quickly on was YouTube. And one of the key things that we always had in our mind is that theatre is live and theatre is interactive. So YouTube offered quite a good way of doing that, because when you even a kind of on-demand recording, an archive recording, you can make feel as live using their Premiere function, and people can chat and they can get to know each other in the chat while they watch the show together. So that was very important, that we felt that we could bring shows out that felt like shows still. And it was very successful. I mean, we started up a partnership with Google Arts and Culture towards the end of that first sort of 5-6 week season. And basically they helped promote our show using the algorithm. And that is how we racked up a large number of views and an audience. We then moved into like second and now third phases of it, which is now that we've built an audience, we know that the content, there's a demand for it. How do we essentially pay our artists so that we can continue doing this? And that's kind of where we are now. We're sort of in the experiments of how do we not just give it away, but how do we really make connections with people who are prepared to directly support our artists.
And so you're saying sort of the second phase is starting to think about how do we make some money from this? What were the main considerations there? What were some of the important decisions that you made?
So I think that it was, I mean, you know, we're subsidized, obviously, like lots of large theatres, but obviously the subsidy only goes so far. And when 85% of your income gets wiped, it's really important that you can basically pay your bills. And one of the biggest bill, if we are to put out stuff, is to our artists. And it's right that we develop models that reward the artists and the creatives who make this work. So I think it was about how do we get back to a sort of economy that artists and venues understand, and hopefully an audience will want to pay for that content. So there was quite a big, there's a lot of question marks there about whether people are prepared to pay for it. And I think that's where our kind of second phase after the first free one was very experimental, because we tried lots of different sort of methods to get people to pay for stuff, slightly different platforms, to see what the demand was really like from which segments of the audience. And I mean, I would say it's still unclear actually, but you know, we've now got quite a lot of data under our belts that we can now sort of look at before we make decisions about programming, digital programming going forward.
You're saying it's unclear. Is there anything that you could share with us about what you have learned, or what is anything becoming clear?
Well, I mean, there are some things, some of which probably seem fairly obvious. The more locked down we are, the more demand there is. You know, it's a sort of digital equivalent of the reason why theatres go dark in the summer, because everyone's outside. And I think if you're locked down, you're more likely to engage in the thing you like in your home. If you're allowed out of your home, you're going to engage less. So we've noticed that there was an uplift in sales when restrictions were tighter. We also have noticed that, and we've done this by splitting our program into several parts, one of which is sort of big signature events. A second one is digital studio events, so smaller scale, more experimental, immersive maybe, interactive maybe. And then we've got a third, which is box sets, which is a sort of model, a kind of testing of a subscription model, basically. Will people buy a bundle? Will they come back multiple times to buy more bundles? And I think from that, we've worked out that there are, if you're going to do a big event, really concentrate on it. Don't cannibalize your own sales by doing too much at once. So do one thing at a time, and really focus on one thing at a time, because there seems to be a different buying pattern to our regular bookers in the normal theatre world, where you go on sale with a season and people might buy 5 or 6 shows. The way that people buy stuff, they're late bookers. So if you put something on sale sort of 6 weeks before it goes live, and you don't sell any until the week before, it doesn't mean it will be a failure. But it does mean you really have to hold your nerve. And sometimes you go, oh my God, we're 3 weeks out, we haven't sold any tickets at all, and this has cost us a lot of money to produce. What are we going to do? But it is because the convenience of being at home means that people they don't worry that the stalls are going to sell out and they have to like get their favorite seat first. There's a lot of different psychologies at play. So yeah, I mean, we've uncovered a lot of different things, and I think what will be interesting is the next phase, when basically the world reopens and we see how digital sits alongside live. I mean, our plan is hybrid, so we offer a live stream option alongside a live performance. And we and other organizations are investing heavily in that capability. I mean, once we've completed building it, we will be the oldest television studio in the country. But yeah, like it's all about hybrid when we're back in the real world.
Yes, yes. And it sounds like you're sort of willing to experiment and try things and see what works for you, and then take it step by step and learn as you're going along.
I think it's really important. Like, I mean, what we did was we started small, but the way that we talked about it made it sound like it was big, if that makes sense. So I think it's really, you put a lot of pressure on yourself if you kind of go out there and you go, right, I'm going to create Netflix. That is a huge dream. And also, if you don't know the audience demand, potentially massively financially damaging to go too big too quick. So having, like, we had in our mind what we wanted to do, and we worked out what's the simplest way to do it, and what's the kind of smallest way to do it, and what's the cheapest way to do it. And each time we do that, we then go, okay, well, what's the next bit that we want to do? So we went from, is there an audience? That was the free bit. And then we went into, can we make any money from this? That was the sort of paywall bit. And we built a paywall on our website. I can talk more about that in a second. And now we're on the kind of third phase, which is different payment kind of types, like pay what you choose, or flat fees, and where we pitch the pricing, and user experience. User experience is a really big one, but it's a really difficult one to focus on at the beginning. It's one to focus on when you've established or think you know kind of what you're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Would you say more about the paywall? Because I think lots of the questions that we've been asked about, how do you measure success? How do you decide what to price? So I think people are interested in those things. So what have been your sort of moves really towards this?
So, I mean, one of the key reasons to build a kind of paywall system for an organization like ours was primarily actually to ensure that we had access to the data on who we were engaging. So yes, there's a kind of income generation thing, but there's also if someone is liking our stuff and buying our stuff, or even registering to watch it for free, we want to know who they are so we can give them more of it. And so in that sense, we were like, how do we do this in a way that isn't alien to our large existing customer base, but is also fairly seamless for new customers? So we decided to build a paywall based on Spectrix, which is our ticketing provider, for on-demand shows, I should say. For our live streaming, we use a mixture of different platforms, from Zoom to Ticketco to Vimeo. But for our on-demand content, we wanted people's customer data, so we built this paywall using Spectrix. So people log in, they sign up for a customer account with Bristol. And it actually means the slice we give away is very small, because we have an excellent agreement with Spectrix, and lots of venues have good agreements with Spectrix, which are very, very small percentage deals. Some of the other providers, certainly for live streaming, have very high percentage deals. Some of that's to do with bandwidth costs, and some of it's to do with it's a new realm and everyone is finding out where the splits should be. But if you can use Spectrix to power the kind of communication and the ticketing, then actually you can keep more of your income.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to quickly look at some of the questions and see. These are just quite specific questions. Going back to kind of earlier stages, somebody asking about your partnership with Google Arts and Culture. Did you have to pay for that? And how did you establish the relationship? I don't know if you can say anything about that.
So, well, this was, I mean, it's a stroke of luck, really, in that they were doing on YouTube, they had noticed this trend of arts organizations putting work out. And, you know, they said, we're going to support this by having this playlist, which is promoted by the algorithm, and we will curate what goes into that, as in Google will curate what goes into that playlist. So they saw that we were getting a fair amount of traffic organically through what we were putting out, and they reached out to us to basically say, would we be interested in appearing in this playlist? Of course, you go, yes, please. I will get quite a significant audience if you do that. And then Google Arts and Culture, we basically through that got in with Google Arts and Culture. I mean, sadly, it is a bit of a closed shop, but you can contact them. You know, they were particularly interested in us because we have a hefty kind of heritage, and they are primarily kind of focused on art galleries and museums, because that was how Google Arts and Culture started, was focusing on that. So there was a kind of synergy, to use a terrible word. Yeah, I mean, that's how the relationship started with that, and then we just kept it going. And it was very useful in our free phase, and it's now very useful primarily for us talking about the story of Bristol and the story behind our shows.
Yeah. And it's interesting you saying that they're kind of casting around for people to work with, which is, I suppose, one of the things I remember you saying to me before was that there's such an appetite, you know, for those sort of smaller organisations and things. Putting your work out there is so beneficial because there are people looking for content at the moment, and it's you know, there's a value in those relationships and building them.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that to any artists or producers that you know, it's currently I can't remember which one, it's seller's market. So basically, if you've got a show, if you've got a really like hot digital property, then actually there's loads of people looking for it. And basically now it's sort of democratized programming in a little way in lots of these venues, where previously programming on our stages might have been based around pre-existing relationships or the scale that a theatre company might have got to or something like that. In the digital world, because it's new, there are no rules anymore. If you're a small producer and you've produced a piece of quality work, get in touch with any venues that you think have a platform that might suit, and you'd be surprised at how many people would be interested in talking to you.
And do you work with some small scale arts organisations?
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment we've got as I said, we've got our kind of special events in our digital studio, and for example, we're working with a theatre company in Bristol called Sharp Teeth, and they are doing an immersive Sherlock Holmes show. In fact, 2 different types, Sherlock in Holmes. They're really good fun. I know this isn't about plugging and selling stuff, but if you do want a really fun night with your friends, it's on Zoom and interactive. But that's just really small theatre company. And then we're working with another theatre company, an Auto Teatro theatre company, which is where you perform the piece yourself under guidance. And that's called Swimming Home. And that's an immersive soundscape that is done through an app. Yeah, so like we work with small artists all the time. But the key thing for us on the small scale is it's about the uniqueness of the experience rather than the kind of scale of show. I suppose that's an interesting programming thing to think about, is if you are small scale, if you have just a show that was on stage that's been filmed, that's harder to pitch because the audience, when they're looking for pre-recorded stuff, is looking for your Les Mis, your really big stuff they already know, or stuff that can conjure up the idea that it's something that they already know. but they are prepared to watch it if the technology and the immersion is really good.
Interesting. It's really interesting. So somebody's asked another question following up about your notion of the seller's market, and saying, would venues or would venues, film festivals, Bristol Old Vic, whoever, want exclusive access to is exclusivity important to you as a distribution partner?
It depends. So we do. So for example, we work with a lot of venues. Like we are one of the partner venues for Dorian Gray, which is basically produced by Barn Theatre and other great co-producers. And we are one of the kind of selling partners. And essentially, it's a ticket split. We take 20% off the top. We're just a referrer. And that is a kind of model where someone owns their show, and then they go out to a load of different basically marketplaces, and it's a co-promotion deal. So in that sense, no, we don't have any exclusivity over that show at all. What we're doing is we're trying to funnel our audience towards that show so that that show can make the biggest income it can, and everyone involved in the partnership benefits. So that's a form. A different model, like, so for example, we've got Swimming Home, and now that is basically we have that exclusive for a week. So if you buy it through us, you will be able to access it for that week. And we basically take the income minus the agreement with the artist. And then we've got other shows which are fully exclusive to us, or ones that we have co-produced and we decide the terms. Or if they're, say, archive recordings that we own, we basically, in agreement with the artists, decide on how long it should run. So there's not an easy answer to that. There are lots of different models, and actually it depends on the show which model fits.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I've just got a final question to you, then I'm going to bring the other panelists back in because we've just got a very few minutes left. So when you're sort of looking ahead, you know, you've just launched your third phase. What do you think, what are your main opportunities for, what are you looking for this year?
So I think that the main opportunities from our point of view are one, in expanding the audience that couldn't come to our building, so using our global audience. So our online work has reached 52 countries, and you know, we've had a significant number of customers overseas and lots of new customers in the UK. We regularly get messages from people saying, oh, I've watched this in Scotland, I've watched this in Northumbria, and I've never even thought of going to Bristol before. So our key thing is, how do we maintain access for those people while also bringing our people back into the building, our normal audiences and new audiences, Bristol. So that's why we're investing in live stream rigs for our spaces so that we can have online tickets available, so bolting on an extra piece of income. And then the other side of the future is where the arts meets digital, because there's been such amazing collaboration between new art forms, you know, video games and theatre artists, you know, podcasters, like all sorts of people who weren't necessarily in the theatre stable are now working with theatre artists or becoming theatre artists in their own right. And we want to have lots of different ways of interacting with them, hosting their work. Essentially, we view now Bristol Vic at Home as an additional stage. We have our main stage, we have our studio, and now we have Bristol Vic at Home. And so, yeah, it's just using it as an additional stage.
Thank you very much. Thanks ever so much, Jack. That's great. And I'm going to ask that question, just a final minute or so back. Nick, I can see you. What are the opportunities for you? I don't know if you're hearing the same things or whether yours is a different approach to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur. I mean, we're on the independent artist scale of things, so, but concur with Jack. It's about for us, and we've got particular models, you know, taking our work further internationally and partnering with people here in the UK. that we haven't done beforehand. One of the examples of that is looking to how we can build on a couple of residencies that we've done with universities in the US. So do sort of online residencies, which include streaming shows, but also online class visits, lectures, etc. And also how can we continue to develop the art form, or work. Javad, as I say, integrates social media and simultaneous feeds into your phone. But the third part of that trilogy, as I mentioned, we're looking quite probably actually to develop as a digital first version, and how the challenge to Javad and his team as artists using that form.
Lovely, thank you very much. And Jess, to you, where are your opportunities this year? Oh, you're muted.
I knew I was going to do that. Opportunities for our artists or opportunities for our audiences?
Either. Let's think about audiences. Let's think about audiences.
I think it'd be interesting to see what we're able to do with our events outside of the festival this year, because I think we want to give our audiences a chance to connect with the work from last year again as well, and the people especially the people who we commissioned to make work last year. We want to give those audiences coming to the festival for the first time this year a chance to connect with that work, as well as looking forward to the 2021 programme. But in terms of sort of growing our audience, our main focus this year is making sure that the content at the festival is viewable by lots and lots of different people. Last year we had captions and subtitles on all of the films at the festival, but those were in English. And this year we really want to try, we're committing to making sure that all of the films in our programme have an audio description version and a BSL interpreted version, as well as continuing to encourage people from around the world to watch the content. I'd love to look into things like subtitling in different languages as well. I think I'm in Spain at the moment, and there are some streaming services here that do not have English subtitles, and that has been a really obvious reminder to me of how important it is to have translation. And there are some amazing organizations out there actually working collaboratively to translate certain content, translate books, and translate online work, and I'm really keen to kind of connect with those groups as well.
Lovely, thank you very much. And just for a final brief word, Sarah, just from what you've heard, what are you taking from this session? You're muted. It's
probably for the best. No, it's we're still in this phase of experimentation, and I think I would just echo what Jack said about kind of being ambitious but cautious at the same time, particularly with investing in new platforms. You really don't need to, Jack did all the experimentation stage kind of for free, and seeing what audiences were out there, and then just build on it gradually. New platforms are popping up all the time. The existing platforms are improving. If you are slow to kind of join this distribution journey, like, don't panic. There's actually a benefit in that for you, because you get to kind of benefit from all the learnings that everyone else has had, and kind of use the advanced technologies that will be available. So don't panic. Do take a look at those resources that are sent over. I know there were a lot of questions about working out price plans and things. Again, I think it comes down to experimentation, that there are some really interesting messages in there about different approaches and providing different options for people. So yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. So last thing to say is two things actually. There's, as you leave the meeting, you'll see that there's an evaluation form, and we really appreciate the minute it takes you to fill in the evaluation form, because without that information we wouldn't be able to provide these free webinars to our audience. So a big plea to do that. And also to say thank you so much to all our panelists for their so generous to really reflect on the work that they've done and share their insights and experiences with you. So just a big thank you all for all of your time, and thank you very much for everybody for their contributions. And that's it. So enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.